The Japanese archipelago. While in America, we have the boring and stinky metropolis known as Place. Have you ever tried visiting Place, Japan? Ever seen this boring sight? What about in Japan? Well, this shouldn't be the only thing convincing you to move to this beautiful country. How about the wonderful work culture? Everyone here is treated fairly, and everyone... especially foreigners,
even had a company say that employees need to pay them when they miss work,
are given plenty of work opportunities at some of the world's fastest growing and technologically advanced companies. Or maybe you want to move here for the culture, which is fair and equal. It treats everyone, regardless of race or sex, with respect and... Okay, fine, I'll stop glazing Japan. I'm sure you all have heard enough of that. Japan, for those living in -1 billion, has basically become a global cultural powerhouse, second only to really the United States and maybe Europe. What you are saying, bro? Europe is a continent, bro? We are different countries, bro. Typical America. Either way, most of this cultural significance is both the result of the aftershocks created by the Japanese economic miracle throughout the 70s and 80s, as well as anime becoming wildly popular abroad within the past decade or so. This cultural mega status has made the idea of Japan become more and more romanticized as time has gone on. I mean, you've probably seen it. If you go to your average high school 13 years ago and say, hey, has anyone seen that new episode of Steins? Yeah, you'd probably end up like that guy. Nowadays, if you say something like, yo, anyone see that new episode of One Piece? At least one person of every ethnic and racial background on Earth will materialize into the room you're in and swarm you to engage in a lively debate about what just happened on their favorite cartoon last night, at least in America. The differences this had on American culture, and thus by proxy the rest of the world, has catapulted Japan into a new cultural renaissance in a sense. What's funny is that, historically speaking, this isn't the first time this has happened. You have an influence on Portuguese and Spanish art in the late 17th and early 18th centuries due to things learned from Europe's first contact with Japan, and the Japanese movement in the late 19th century spurred on by an increasingly open Japan starting in 1858. For whatever reason, Japan and its culture have captivated the world multiple times throughout history. However, things are different now. Rather than a passing interest in Japan or a more reserved, oh yeah, they're pretty cool attitude that the rest of the world has towards them, we've seen an ever-increasing idealization of what can just be seen as another part of the world out of many. I know not all of you venerate Japan as some kind of utopia, but a lot of people nowadays definitely have this idealized view of Japan in some form or another. Whether that be the belief of a superior nature, culture, art, media, fashion, etc. I've gotten pretty tired of the ridiculous amount of hype surrounding Japan, which is often propped up by unrealistic expectations and, for better or for worse, anime. You might be thinking, on what authority can I have commentary on Japan? It's not like I've been there. Yeah, I've been there. And it was by far the most interesting trip I've ever been on. I'll weave my experiences in and out of the video as needed, but I want to focus on a bigger picture viewpoint of the country before I dive deeper. The question I'm seeking to answer, broadly speaking, is this. Is Japan really all that amazing? Or is it just another part of the world that has its own goods and bads like anywhere else on Earth? You can probably guess what my answer is to that question, but let's actually take a deeper, more objective dive into both the good and bad things about Japan on a generalized basis. Without further ado, welcome, ladies and gentlebakas, to Japan. Now, to begin, is Japan a bad country? No, not even close. Sorry, contrarian edgelords, I'm not going to be bashing the country as a whole for just having some issues. As an American, we all know how big of a double standard that would be. To prove that I genuinely do believe Japan has some really amazing things about it, let's talk about some of them, largely from personal experience. Just to get it out of the way, yes, I do think Japanese animation, as of now, is just better than Western animation. This isn't because of some immutable characteristic or a coolness factor, and I do have some objective reasons behind this. For starters, Western animation for the longest time has been dominated by a top-down system. In this way, independent artists or production teams pitch shows to networks who have boards that decide to greenlight them or toss their pitch Bibles in the trash. The show, in America and much of the Western world, does not see the light of day unless an executive gives it the go-ahead. In Japan, however, the system is largely bottom-up. For an anime to be created in the first place, it needs to be based on an already successful property created by an individual or small team of artists from the manga space. While these are often published by large companies, with the notable exception of stuff like One Punch, a property needs to be successful due to the work put in by an individual, which greatly increases its chances of getting a full animated rendition. This system, while not immune to the predatory practices and abuse by publishers that we'll talk about later, it does result in a better, more fleshed out show as opposed to Western networks which constantly try to create the next SpongeBob or something and focus on comedy and pre-existing franchises to make a quick, guaranteed buck. Yes, Japan is indeed a beautiful place. While it's not the only beautiful place on Earth, there are certainly few countries which are as consistently beautiful as Japan in my opinion. Riding on the Shinkansen and watching large open fields go by with mountains in the distance, or taking a $12 round-trip funicular to the top of some mountain to see the best views my eyes have ever laid themselves upon, or literally taking a local train to the airport on my way out. Japan genuinely is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever visited. And that's saying something after I've climbed mountains in the Alps, hiked through Grand Tetons, and marveled at St. Peter's Basilica. However, I'm not gonna pretend that Japan is pretty everywhere. Just like the US, just like Europe, just like anywhere else, it has its more boring and dull places. Don't believe me? Let's do an experiment. To try it for yourself, go to Japan on Google Maps. Then drag the Street View marker to basically anywhere north of the Tokyo Metro. There's a pretty solid chance you're gonna land somewhere that isn't ugly, but isn't the most beautiful place you've ever laid eyes on. Or let's just take the opposite approach. Drop it literally anywhere, pretend you don't see Japanese text, maybe at a Walmart and a mobile gas sign, and oh, there we go. We've just invented rural Montana. All that aside though, Japan is definitely a culture that values and appreciates natural beauty, so you get more spots like this compared to this. Yes, the people here are very polite. The only rudeness I ever encountered here was from some like middle-aged North English dude who I caught the glance of a couple times at a gyoza restaurant, only for him to walk by me and say, "You're a fucking deckhead," multiple times before his friend came and apologized for him because he was very drunk apparently, which I've never heard of any British person ever being drunk in my life before, if you can believe it. Every person I encountered would always try their best to be friendly, inviting, and always greet me or whoever I was with a smile. And to the Western-born Japan glazers racing to the comments to tell me how I was probably oblivious to the fact that they are shy and won't really tell people off, first of all, that's not true. I've seen it happen. And second of all, I make sure to be as polite and gracious as possible when it comes to interacting with different cultures. I'm not running around Shinjuku with my shirt off spouting expletives at locals like what might happen in the walled city of New York or Trenton, New Jersey or something. However, as I mentioned earlier, a major drawback with this politeness is that, yeah, Japanese people are quite shy. I'll go more into this later, but it's just a caveat to everything I've said so far. Yes, as a musician myself, Japanese music is really secondary only to American music and beats it in some respects, in its ability to weave different styles and customs together to create some really cool and unique fusion music. Classical rock fusion, an inherently unique style of jazz and funk, Vocaloid, basically most modern genres of music you hear today are either descended from American or Japanese forms of music, or at the very least are echoes of earlier styles from those countries.
But really quickly, we have to do Two-Buck Troop Roll Call! Unusual Chief Guy Finn, Yellow, Premier Tabu TV Cat Mask, Jeff 2, Sokatone Soldier, Andy, Maggie Gordon, alongside ZNN, Chloe Beavers, Agent 2187, Spec Norway, Nep, Callow Fox, Tibet Korkmaz, Duke, Always Cone Maria, Mika Henderson, and Gameboy Patreon, as well as Pink Floyd Fanatic, Zode, M Now Panda, Devogen, Draghi, Alamovo, Blueberry Vanny, Pickle, Haslock, Planet Wild Sunny, and Zakro. Enlist in the Two-Buck Troop by using the link in the description.
Now that I've warded off the people thinking I want to unfairly bash the country for just having some issues, let's dive into the real meat of the video. Why you wouldn't want to move to Japan, despite all the things I just mentioned. If you want to live anywhere on Earth, unless it's in some magical commune inside an anarcho-socialist head, you gotta get your broke ass off the couch and go make some money. But how exactly would you do this around the world? Well, for now, let's just ignore the whole, "Yeah, you can't just work for us when you're on a tourist visa, sir," shtick that people love telling me. In America, let's find, okay, here's little Joshua, all right? He's 17 years old and ready to start working. Let's give him a job at Chipotle, I guess. You get like 5 people that come up to the line all like, "Hey man, can I get a chicken burrito, but please remove the seasoning and tortilla and add a few sprinkles of Hawaiian volcanic salt glass on top and maybe a squirt of horseshoe crab blood on top," and you just make it and put up with whatever. You get paid $15 an hour, which isn't great, but if you split a place with some of your friends and you have a little side hustle or passion project going for you, you can definitely sustain yourself for now. You can also just up and quit if your boss is annoying you, you're tired of the job, or if you want to move on to somewhere else. We can even extrapolate this to higher education. Let's say you're a computer science major who, after wrestling a music major for the last bet at the homeless shelter, finally are able to extract enough energy from a nearby power line to both charge your laptop and pass an interview from some billion-dollar mega corporation who just opened their first CS position since the Precambrian. You're probably not paid as much as you like, but a lot of larger companies offer good benefits, bonuses for high performance, and a hopefully suitable work culture that can help propel you to the next level of your career. whether that be through promotions or applying learned experience at a new company. Now let's relocate little Joshua to the nation of Japan with a brand new working visa. Where can you end up? Well, you got about 3 options. The first one, and one of the more common ones for younger people, is being an English teacher. People seem to think this one's easy to get, but let's just see if that's really the case. The requirements are pretty reasonable. Are you fluent in Japanese? If not, good luck. You might be able to land a position as an assistant teacher or as a teacher in an international school. If you fill the requirements somewhat, good luck being picked out of potentially hundreds of applicants to any given job. Even if you fill all the perfect requirements, good luck making a living wage, enjoying a less stressful life, on top of learning to integrate yourself with local culture and adjusting to a radically different lifestyle. According to this poster where they say, who from the West can live on $1,300 take home each month? Even if rent is only $400, you'd be living on $900 a month. Literally, Japanese McDonald's employees make around $1,200 per month take home. As a trained and qualified English teacher in Japan, you're making less than if you had worked at a McDonald's in America and Japan. And that's after going through the massive Japanese bureaucracy to both be allowed to work there, paying to get over there, and getting set up in the first place, paying for daily transportation, and everything in between. But, as I said earlier, being an English teacher is a job that, despite the low pay for high qualifications, can at least be understood for being in this position. It's a lower demand, high supply industry that is shrinking by the year, on top of, needing the proper qualifications to have the job. Okay, let's pivot away from that to more traditional industries. Congratulations, little Joshua, you've been promoted.
I have?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you your very own diploma.
Oh, gee, thanks.
Now you can work at a higher skill company of your choosing, but choose wisely because Japan has a wide variety of work environments from chill to... Anyways, good luck. Alright, it's been about 3 months. Let's check in on little Oh, hey there, buddy. What's up?
I haven't gotten more than 4 hours of sleep in weeks. Almost every night I go out drinking with my boss until we puke. Most nights I miss the last comp for the metro, so I can't even go home. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, if you're a salaryman in Japan, get ready to live the lives that 19-year-old unionized Starbucks baristas think they do. Your bosses treat you as expendable. You live and work, quote, 40 hours a week, but you're often secretly required to work more. While what this poster said isn't going to be what everyone experiences, on a general note, it is unfortunately a common thing in Japan. Quote, my wife, Japanese, works a minimum of 14 hours a day, 30 hours overtime a week. If she tries to get help to reduce her hours, the response is that she is inefficient at her work and needs to work faster. 14 hours a day! That leaves you a maximum of 2 hours of free time if you want to get 8 hours of sleep. In Japan, it's entirely expected for you to go out drinking with your boss very frequently. Does this seem like a dumb idea? Yeah, it does to us living in guild cultures at least. Expecting that from somebody in America and making them feel like shit the next morning just for the sake of a drinking challenge would make many of us, regardless of status, probably feel pretty guilty. But in Japan, a lot of times it's an expectation. If you don't go out that night to drink with your boss that you don't even like, good luck having any future job prospects in the company or gaining the respect of your employer. On top of this, because a constant well-organized output of work is constantly required, lest you bring shame upon yourself, things better not change at the company, and you better not bring any concerns up to your boss. And the thing is, if you don't suck up to your boss or authority figure in some way, you're gonna get absolutely shafted and go nowhere very quickly. This is all pretty bad, but to be completely fair, not 100% of Japan is this way. Not every company's gonna treat you like garbage, ignoring the fact that you're a foreigner, and you're not always gonna be working 45 hours of overtime a month. On top of this, much of the world also sees unfair practices such as this. So, you might be asking, how does Japan uniquely stand out in this category among developed countries? Yeah, we have yet to talk about the wonders that are known as... What's a black company, you might ask? Well, imagine the worst case scenario of a job I just mentioned and make it even worse. How exactly? Well, we have a wonderful source here from this utterly fascinating Instagram account called literally Salaryman Tokyo. He details his day-to-day life working for one of these companies. In this video, our hero describes an utterly horrific work culture. Oftentimes, black companies target young workers or foreigners, like our little Joshua, because they genuinely just haven't heard about black companies or the work environment. They'll work you to death, giving you meaningless tasks and threats if you don't complete them on time. Bosses don't want to help you, nor do they care about you in the first place, and just expect you to sit down and shut up. You just work all day, tirelessly, lest you summon the rage of your boss, all to make it home in the bum-ass middle of the night to get like 7 hours of sleep if you're lucky. Well, gee, that sounds kind of bad. I'd quit right away if I were them. Yeah, right. Let's say that you've had enough and you're sick of being treated like glorified property. Let's think of the man and tell him that I quit. Yeah, we're gonna sue the shit out of you. What? Yep, if you leave, we're just gonna have to sue you down to every last atom of concrete in the foundation of your house. Yeah, you heard that right. Your own company that treats you horribly, almost like they didn't want you to be there, will make sure that you're walking away from them pretty much empty-handed. And Even if you can avoid this fate, they're probably going to sabotage your future job prospects by emailing future employers and trying to blackmail you. Again, since Japan is largely a shame-based culture, many of these companies will, out of fear of bringing shame upon their company and customers, not hire you. On top of that, even if you get past that stage, they might make you write an apology letter to guilt trip you. They're playing to both shame and guilt culture here, which is truly sinister. In America, we'd probably just say, yeah, fuck you, I'm not doing that, and we'd probably be fine. On top of that, word would get out about this company doing this kind of shit, and they'd either be put out of business or at the very least, see both internal and external pressures from investors, customers, and the government to at least partially change their ways. Despite how rough we got it over here, at least Western society has a strong enough influence on companies and organizations to universally shun practices like this, unlike turning a blind eye to it like what happens in Japan. Just to be real, this is not saying the West is superior or anything like that, it's just quirks of our culture and that Japan is a very high trust society, which is kind of the opposite from the US. Alright, let's just leave all traditional work behind. Let's say you're an artist and that you want to work for an anime studio or draw for a living. Well, I hope you enjoy having every last drop of creativity and your enjoyment of your work sucked out of you by big publishers attempting to work young and inexperienced people to death with little pay. Young people, often from lower income countries such as Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc., even have work outsourced to them simply because they will work harder for less money. Big studios will use their beloved lineup of shows and create a sort of wow effect to create an idealized vision of what being a part of a team that creates anime is really like. If you remember, about a year ago, the studio behind the anime Jujutsu Kaisen, MAPPA, was under a lot of fire for working their animators so hard for such little pay that they could barely keep themselves afloat and had to make a choice between seeing their families or keeping their jobs. Long story short, in 2023, it came out that MAPPA had forced its employees to sign a non-disclosure agreement related to the working conditions of the company. It's basically forcing them to stay silent against their will. A common tactic they use is outsourcing the drawing of in-betweens, basically like references between which an animation will move, and pay those artists, often newer and experienced ones, per still they draw. You might be thinking, oh yeah, it's probably, pretty quick to draw these and they might get paid like $10 a drawing. Yeah, how about averaging around $1 to $2 per completed drawing that can take anywhere between 10 minutes to an hour to complete? Essentially, most animators in the industry can expect to make about the same as a US minimum wage worker. In 1997, in an economy with a frequently weak and volatile currency, even if you're a higher paid individual, the amount of time you'll have to work will be absolutely soul-crushing. Expect up to 11-hour days with this previously mentioned low pay. Even disregarding the ridiculous hours, you can't even compare it to similarly low-paying jobs elsewhere because, often, people can work second jobs. Many of my teachers growing up would also do bartending on the side or run a separate business because they had mostly free weekends and time over breaks to make money. This isn't even possible with an 11-hour workday schedule. Okay, fine. Let's say you land the perfect job, are treated well, and genuinely enjoy your life. Well, good luck seeing any meaningful growth in the industry you work in and the economy you live in. Japan, since the 90s, has been struggling to grow economically. They basically tried everything under the sun. Negative interest rates, enticing foreign workers, government programs to help stimulate the economy, etc. Almost none of this has worked. It's gotten to the point that Germany, an economy that 20 years ago had a third of Japan's GDP, has recently just surpassed it. And while this is a problem that is less tangible than, say, the aforementioned black company thing, its effects are felt societally and on the macro scale. The yen is volatile and weak against the dollar and euro. As an example, when I went in July, $1 ended up getting to a wild 160 yen. By the time September came around, it had fallen to 140 yen per dollar, aka the yen became more valuable. Now, as of December, it has risen back to almost 150 yen to the dollar, nearly breaking 160 yen in mid-November. So, if your plan is to make some money and leave, good luck keeping the value of your work in place. While it might sound good that the fluctuations can go up and down and, maybe you could time it, the volatility affects both the economy of Japan and your ability to find suitable work. While I'm not going to pretend I can give you a dissertation on the macroeconomic effects of currency instability, just know that it's not really a good thing. And just a quick aside, if you like this type of content and want to see more of it on this channel, just let me know by subscribing and leaving your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to start a discussion about my findings and opinions. Alright, fine. The work sucks, the economy isn't great, but let's just ignore that. What if little Joshua wants to be a content creator, like those cool people he's seen over on YouTube? They can work for himself and not to put up with all the bullshit of the black companies or the job market in general. Well, the problems don't really end there. To succeed in any new culture, you gotta, to the shock of many of my fellow Americans, integrate with said new culture. With that comes learning a new language, understanding local customs, and being privy to their expectations. And, oh boy, while Japanese culture might seem cool on the outside, on the inside, it's really a hidden leviathan, ready to devour those who are not prepared to adapt quickly and appropriately to its requirements and off-putting aspects. I know the job market over here is bad, but I'll find a way. Just like my favorite anime character, Itsumi Rinkaro from Ota Ota Rinkaro. Everyone will learn to love me, and I'll learn to love and appreciate them too. Then, one day, I'll find true love from an extremely skinny and pasty white woman with blue hair, big eyes, and massive tits. Let's be honest here, Japan has a bit of an image problem. And I don't mean a Dr. Disrespect kind of image problem. I mean one of unrealistically high expectations. Whether that be due to an incorrect perception of Japanese culture because of anime, a belief in a purely honorable and polite nation, or some twisted hypersexual interpretation of its lifestyle. As much as I understand most don't fully believe in any of these three ideas, you'd be hard-pressed to find people in the quote, Japan is amazing crowd who don't fall victim to one of these misconceptions. In this part of the video, I'm gonna weave my own experiences alongside the thoughts and experiences of others to make sure you're getting the most well-rounded view of it all. For now, let's start in a more generalized place and work our way inwards. Xenophobia is something many of us have heard from Japan. If you're new to the English language or aren't totally sure what that means, you're probably not American, but what that basically means is the fear of people from other countries. Again, while I must stress this is not a universal statement for Japan, many foreigners, often due to race or ethnicity, are discriminated upon in Japan. This obviously happens in other countries too, but the main reason I'm talking about it here is because Japan is, again, often idealized unnecessarily and tends to attempt avoiding this image. While the problem is often overblown a bit, there are lots of subtle things that may or may not affect your ability to live here comfortably. I will say, personally, I didn't experience any noticeable discrimination, but I'm also a tall, skinny white guy, so there's that. An anecdote from one of my friends I'd like to tell is this. His dad, who's Puerto Rican, which if you didn't know is an island territory of the United States that's mostly inhabited by Hispanic people, went to Japan on a business trip sometime before COVID. Just a note, his dad specifically is definitely not a white person. After arriving at this hotel, he decided to get to the pool. Once he got in, every single Japanese person got up and left. There's instances of stuff like this on public transport, people getting up and moving seats, etc. It's not overly common, but it's also more noticeable than in America or Europe for most places. Like I said, every country has issues like that, but I want to help bring some people back down to earth about how Japan may be represented in television or otherwise. I mean, you've probably seen it. Most anime you watch have people of like every skin color and race and gender and genuinely an impressive amount of diversity, which can potentially mislead people into how some areas of Japan may treat foreigners. Now, onto a problem that's mostly unique to Japan, over-sexualization and sex crime. If you're a woman, or in some cases, a man who dresses feminine, this part's for you. Do you notice how in literally every anime, except ones made by a woman, Fullmetal Alchemist being the fantastic example, largely speaking, all of the women have this extremely over-sexualized vibe to their clothes, mannerisms, and general demeanor? What about the amount of anime and manga that features some aloof loser somehow stumbling into some magical world or perfect school where a bunch of high school girls are just absolutely gobsmacked by him and constantly want to get in his pants? What about the permeation of lolly culture into the media and in other places where they really shouldn't be, like with massage parlors and escorts? Well, we'll get into the specifics later, but for now, let's preface the current situation with some actual events that have showcased how out of control this has gotten in Japan. I guess a good place to start would be the adult escorts there's often spotted and often had come up to us while walking around in Tokyo and Osaka. This obviously is not unlike many other places that you can travel to, but the difference here is the clothing and general aesthetic the organizations running these establishments and managing these escorts put on for tourists and locals alike. Many of them are dressed in childlike clothing or maid outfits and have tons of makeup on to further accentuate what are known as neonatal features, often involving the appearance of larger eyes alongside a smaller nose and mouth. Similarly, they talk in high-pitched voices like a young schoolgirl would in most of Japanese media. On top of this, I've even heard of establishments that specifically role-play high school-style scenarios for customers if they pay a certain fee, often revolving around a classroom setting or a public transport setting. This is really unlike anywhere else I've ever been to or heard of, and it really prefaces this situation on how out of control it has gotten. That's not to mention other strange things, like that used panties vending machine, or billboards showing young anime women in bikinis or other forms of revealing clothing everywhere. I promise you I'm not being a prude, it doesn't offend me, but it's something off-putting to see in a public and well-traveled area rather than in the usual red light district or in a more adult-centered area. The over-sexualization and frequent pushing of childlike features in sexualized mediums has really created a lot of issues. What might those be? Well, let's talk about some of them. Some of us know the fact that, at least until recently, the age of consent in Japan was an eye-watering 13 years old. 13! This led to a notoriously sketchy legal framework that often let people who abused kids off with minimal repercussions. This all came to a head in 2023 when a 56-year-old Japanese politician thought it would be, quote, strange if he was arrested for having intercourse with a 14-year-old girl.
Cause I like high school girls, that's why!
Saying this in America would have your head splattered against a brick wall by some people, but for most of recent Japanese history, this would have been seen as a problem by only a small but growing contingent of everyday citizens. The government, however, was silent on this issue for decades, still basing their age of consent on a law from 117 years ago. Finally, with these comments, the Japanese parliament voted to raise the age of consent from 13 to 16, which is still quite low compared to many other countries. They also finally redefined what they called, quote, forced intercourse, as now belonging under a general guise of non-consent. Basically, until very recently, there were numerous cases of non-consensual but non-violent cases of this act occurring that were thrown out or significantly lessened in the severity if the victim was over the age of 13 and, quote, could not prove that the interaction was violent. Only if they were under 13 was the, quote, violence part ignored. On top of this, Japan has a huge issue with minor sex crimes such as battery assault or groping on public transport. While officially, Japan's rate of non-consensual assault, sorry, I'm not trying to get demonetized, is more than 37 times less than that of the US, that's because an estimated 95% of cases are not reported. And for children, as well as members of the LGBT community, it's likely a lot lower. On top of this, many schoolgirls report that this happened to them at least once while on public transport. I mean, Jesus, I remember one being on an escalator in Akihabara and seeing signs on the wall that said, quote, beware of upskirting. But what might be the root of all this behavior, and why has it continued to worsen over so many years? Well, my friend, that may come down to much of the media, and especially anime that's being produced in Japan, as well as a overall culture of silence that discourages people from speaking out against their abusers. I can speak from experience. Japan has a huge issue with everyday over-sexualization, especially of childlike features. As I mentioned earlier, I can give so many examples of instances where I saw escorts on the side of the street harassing friends of mine while dressed in little maid skirts and wearing makeup that enhance their more childlike features. Other, less lascivious examples involve what are known as, quote, idols, which are usually young-looking adult women in largely revealing clothing that sing and dance for crowds of older men in a weird hybrid of anime and real life. Here's a video I got in Osaka of this very thing happening randomly when I was walking down the street. This place fucking rules. As I mentioned earlier, if you've ever watched like an anime before, you've seen how often high school kids, young girls, and even trans people are sexualized. A great example is an anime like Dr. Stone, which I myself really like, but there are multiple instances of often female characters who are canonically 16 or younger having very extreme proportions and a large focus on said body parts, often unnecessarily. I don't really need to list out more examples because I'm sure you can come up with your own. On top of this, Japan has a huge issue with virginity. Yeah, really. According to a study conducted in 2019, over a quarter of Japanese people under the age of 40 are virgins. While this may seem like a bit out of left field, bear with me here. This issue is largely driven by an overworked nation of young people who have no time or ability to meet each other. Despite the government attempting to spur development in this way, they've so far failed. It's a crisis that also affects nations like South Korea and even China to an extent. What this means is that, importantly, a lot of people, specifically men, have less knowledge and experience surrounding courtship and romance, which leads to the unfortunate reality that anime and NSFW anime, again I'm trying to keep my monetization, have led to unrealistic expectations for many. Anime such as Steins Gate, while absolutely a great anime, have perpetuated scenarios like this. A man who's a giant loser that suddenly gets involved with like 40 attractive women that also finds the love of his life among them. While I'm not saying this is impossible, it has gradually progressed to, now, in more modern anime, we have what's known as the genre of isekai. Isekai, for the uninitiated, is a genre that you've probably heard parts of before. Someone in a usually shitty state of living one day dies or magically wakes up in some fantasy or video game world that they now have to explore and figure out. While not all follow this exact formula, it has become increasingly common. What has developed out of this is an increasing amount of stories that involve
forced labor.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean the horrors of real-life examples of this. I mean a male loser archetype being teleported into a video game world where he purchases women and doesn't necessarily use them, but it's very much implied that's the case. While this concept in full is nowhere near universal, many shows incorporate creepy elements such as this in an attempt to either satisfy the creator themselves by using a self-insert, or to satisfy, often male fans, who have been gradually lulled into a normalization of this concept. And to be fair, shows that feature this are often criticized by parts of the Japanese public and the anime community, but they're still being made to this day, which tells me that there's definitely an audience for them. The reason I talk about this is to point out its ramifications. In other words, how exactly does this affect everyday life in Japan? Well, I have a couple anecdotes from my time in Japan that can hopefully help illustrate this. During my last few days in Japan, I was staying in Tokyo, specifically a couple blocks away from Akihabara, also known as Electric Town. While this place is genuinely pretty cool and has lots of good food and shops, it's other things that were a bit of a turn-off in terms of my enjoyment of the area. Billboards and signs often featured young-looking, scantily clad anime girls plastered everywhere, often mentioning new shows or advertising products. And while yes, this is not a unique concept to Japan, I promise I've been to Vegas, I've never seen anything quite like this. It's genuinely a one-of-a-kind thing. Continuing the story, I was looking for a Hunter x Hunter figurine I wanted in a gift for somebody else, so I went on Google Maps to try to find a store that sold it. I wandered around with a friend until we stumbled across one specific store. As we walked in, it was noted that the store we needed to go to was on the 3rd story. So we got in the elevator, noticed the 3rd story was blocked off. We figured we'd check out the 2nd story just in case there was some glitch or it was mistyped or something. When those elevator doors opened, we were immediately blindsided by naked anime women everywhere, some even being underage. Where are we right now? Dude, yeah, oh my fucking god, we should do. Safe to say we didn't really stay long. This was not a one-time occurrence either. We'd frequently wander into stores and start climbing stairs to see where we'd end up, only to find ourselves in the back of the store with NSFW manga and other lewd images plastered all over the wall. Even figurines in regular shops that had storefronts facing the street often featured hypersexualized feminine characters on full display for everyone to see. Again, I'm not trying to be a prude, I'm a grown-ass adult, this doesn't really offend me. It's just how I know a lot of people might find this sort of thing weird and uncomfortable. I know that Akihabara isn't the sole representation of Japanese art and culture, but it's important to note that it's a center of nerd culture in Japan, and it's a good representation of anime and a decent chunk of Japan's art culture. The further ramifications of the normalization of this kind of sexualization of childlike concepts and a generally lax attitude towards sexualization in the first place show themselves in the laughably light punishments child offenders get in Japan, as well as a hush-hush culture involving offenses on people of all ages. Good examples of this include manga writer and artist Nobuhiro Watsuki, who, after being caught possessing underage material, was given a fine of $1,800. He was actually, at the time, currently writing a manga that had to be put on hiatus after his charges went public. Then, after he got caught and paid the fine, the manga resumed serialization, like nothing ever happened. Even if someone got off with a light punishment for such a crime basically anywhere else, there's no way in hell they'd ever see the light of day in that industry again. Similarly, the writer Tatsuya Matsuki was arrested and charged with 2 counts of indecent act on a female middle school student. He was given a sentence of 1.5 years, but it was instead suspended and he walked away a free man. Now, to be fair, his manga did not resume after this, but it still details how offenders often receive very light punishments for their actions. That's on top of the earlier mentioned cultural issues with calling out this kind of behavior publicly, so many cases like this probably go unreported or are thrown out privately in some way. Even if a punishment is given, it's often in terms of a civil case where a victim is awarded money for damages, but not a criminal case where the perpetrator actually received jail time for their actions. Is Japan a really fun place to visit for most people? Oh yeah, 100%. I had an absolutely fantastic time while visiting, and I recommend it to basically anybody who's fortunate enough to go. And I guess in that sense, I should extend a huge thank you to my patrons and everybody who watched my videos, because the revenue I've acquired from running this channel actually helped pay for that trip, so every single one of you are basically a patron for this video. After hearing what you've heard today, would you actually move there? Given the frequently abusive work culture, low wages, difficulties of social integration, volatile economy, and over-sexualized media, well, I don't believe Japan is the only nation with issues like this. Again, let me make that very clear. The main reason I made this video is to help break the myth of Japanese exceptionalism and bring some people back down to reality regarding the place. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. I've known of people who have moved to Japan and have been able to thrive just fine. However, I really believe those people are outliers, as I've heard many more stories of people feeling lonely, isolated, and generally depressed after moving there, especially coming from a hyper-social society like America or even various parts of Europe. I know this video is very different from my usual content, but please let me know if you want more of this content by subscribing and letting me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe I'm wrong in any of my opinions, or do you think I understated some problems? I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. But other than that, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.